Hello, guys. David Vose here. Oh, buddy, it's still kind of dreary here in paradise. Got a fire going. I'm inside the cabin, and it's raining off and on. But we're warm and cozy, and me and the cat are sitting here enjoying this beautiful day. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Guys, I literally just turned this on, have no idea what I'm going to do this video on. I got late state start. It's pretty late now, and I don't even have time to even do a video. But I thought I'd just go ahead and turn it on. Maybe I can get something um, up. I had an interesting email, or I think it was an email. I think it was yesterday. Someone, a friend of mine, I guess, brought my name up to Archaic. I guess Jason's his name, of Archaic, because I had done a video about, I don't know, a few days ago or something, where I was discussing Archaic. And I had mentioned that I didn't think he was correct, and I didn't understand why, so many people do watch him. I find his information quite inferior and lacking. And I characterized him as, I think, a couple of times as an atheist. I think more often I say, well, he doesn't believe in Jesus, and he doesn't believe in the Bible and the ancient script. And a friend of mine said, well, that's just wrong. And, he believes in the Bible, he believes in deity. I think at one point they said, well, he believes in the oversoul. Just like you, Dave, you don't believe in God, but see, you believe in deity. See, we all have our way of believing, and it's everybody believes the way they want to, and just like you have your theories and your beliefs, well, he has his, and people just seem to just file off into whatever set of beliefs they want to believe, and they think that's how it works. You just come up with stuff, and you can say, well, I believe that there's a great pumpkin that's coming, on October the 31st every year. He comes to see if the little children are good little boys and girls. And of course, that's what I believe. And of course, that means I believe in God. No, the great pumpkin is not, he's not deity. He's not God. He's not any kind of God. There are a lot of gods. Or I should say there's only one God, and that is, his name is Godin. He's some guy in the Norwegian pantheon or patriarch list or whatever. It was an actual human that is in their history books, as well as Thor is one of these individuals in the pantheon of patriarchs of the Norwegian peoples. He never was a deity. But it's interesting because that's pretty much the same for the Greeks. These people we call deities like Zeus and so forth, they never called them deity. They were Olympians. They lived on Mount Olympus. And they would drink a certain drink called the nectar, and they would eat ambrosia, and they became immortal beings. But they weren't what we consider or think of as gods. This whole concept of God is completely out of control. And it has caused so much confusion in the world that you ask somebody, do you believe in God? And they think that means, do you believe in some particular doctrine in your Bible? And it's kind of like saying, do you believe in the Bible, really? at least in the West. And I suppose if you said that to somebody in India, they'd think you meant Brahman or something. But Brahman's not a god. And our theos, which is the original word for our Christian divine power, is theos, and it doesn't mean a god. Because any way that you slice it, if you say, yeah, but God has come to mean a bearded man who created the universe, right? Well, the Bible doesn't teach a bearded man floating around in the sky in an ethereal place that created the universe. This comes from Sumerian, Akkadian, Egyptian teachings, our biblical knowledge, or the Western view, as is the Hindu Eastern view. All of these stem from the same source, which is the Egyptian beliefs, and they didn't believe in a god or a bearded man floating around in an ethereal place. They believed in cosmic powers. The word was a power, and each of the powers had names like heaven, earth, water. In fact, in the Sumerian view, there was deities that were like Anu, Ki, his wife, which she ended up divorcing him and marrying Enki. But Anu means heaven, Ki means earth, and Enlil means the wind, or spirit, or air, and Ea Enki means the water. He was over the Abzu. So if you get to looking at this, what we have is cosmic powers. They're not beings. They're simply cosmic powers that are anthropomorphized. And to say you believe in those would be ridiculous to say you didn't. Whether you're archaic or anyone else, of course we believe in those. Even scientists believe in these cosmic powers that made the universe. All of us believe there is such a thing as air, right? And air is something that is needed to make up the world, right? All of us know that there is such a thing as earth, sky, there is a sun, right? There is Aten, the sun disk. By the way, above Ra in the Egyptian deity divine list, or power, cosmic power list, we have Ta, which in Greek, that is the deity Hephaestus. Hephaestus is fire. Now that's interesting, and I don't hear people talking about that much, but everybody knows that Ra is light. So even above Ra is fire. It's very interesting for me. But fire, then light. Ta is fire. Ra, we say light, but it may be a little bit different than that in actuality, because right after Ra is Osiris, which might mean light. They don't even know what Osiris means, but I believe it does mean light, because he was the light that enlightened people, who had a son named Horus, and that's the sun, or the hours, or the chronology. You see in Greek mythology, you've got chronos, chronology. Even Anu we've got the word annual. So all these have to do with these kinds of things. But in Hebrew, ruach means spirit. So that's how they would say basically the same word, Ra. And so Ra probably means even higher than the light that you might imagine as just light everywhere, but more like enlightenment or mind or spirit. And then, so Ra would be more like spirit, and then Osiris is light. And then we have Set, which would be like the setting of the sun or darkness. I think that sometimes the words can mean arise, Osiris, and set, setting. And yet, for them, the connotation was light and darkness. And then the next child is Horus, and this is where we get hours and the horoscope, right? And so it really is to do with the sun itself that goes through the chambers in his chariot. It's not light per se, but the sun itself. So you see these descending beings. We have the very same thing when it comes to the Sumerian, as we showed. We've got Anu, heaven, Ki, earth. These are pairs, right? And then you'll have deities that are kind of like light and darkness, water and earth, or, air, and perhaps air would be mind in another sense, and then darkness in the sense of ignorance, And then you go down to Enlil, which is the wind. So Anu is heaven, and then Enlil is the wind, and Ea Inki is the water. He was over the Absu, over the waters. And then Ki is the earth, and there are other, it follows quite well in many cases, because the Egyptian has their deity for earth as Gaia, or Gi, Ge in some spellings, which is very close to the Ki in the Sumerian, and both of them mean earth. So there is certainly a parallel. All of them start with something like the sky and the air and light, mind. There's subtleties. We don't always know what these words mean, whether it's light or mind or enlightenment, but more or less the same kind of thing. They're cosmic powers. And then you get to earthly kings. I remember I was watching Star Trek. I think it was like The Next Generation or something, or maybe it was one of the movies on screen. I think it was probably with Picard. So it was The Next Generation. And I watched all of the Star Trek series, the original, and I watched probably all of the Next Generation ones as well. But there was one or two of the episodes, especially this one, where they were talking about Karnak and Shurapak. And, those were words that I wasn't that familiar with at the time, but I knew they were biblical, Sumerian, Babylonian type names. And I thought, why is Star Trek using these words? And they were like going back into, like they'd gone back into time, or they were quoting some ancient legend of Shurapak. Well, Shurapak is actually the last king just when the flood hit. It literally tells you that the flood happened at that time. And so before Shurapak, there are 8 deities. And these are earthly kings that lived on the earth before the flood. Well, there were actually 8 kings from Adam to Lamech. And you see, why wouldn't you include Noah if it's going all the way to the flood? Because it was in the reign of one particular king that the flood came. So Noah would have been alive and went over into the next world. So the 8 kings that were before Noah goes from Adam down to Lamech, because you wouldn't include Noah, because after the Shurapak was this Utnapishtim. He survives the flood, and that's our biblical Noah. Now, there is little bits of variations, but every one of these ancient histories or mythologies, they have these divine beings. You might call them divine beings. I don't know. I would call them cosmic powers, like heaven and earth and that kind of thing. And then after these divine powers, you have what we would call earthly kings. And there are somewhere around 8 or 9 of them until you get down to another earthly king who survives the flood. In this case, it's Utnapishtim. In our Bible, it's Noah. So it's following the script. And here's something that you should know. According to the Sumerian king list, a total of 8 or sometimes 9 mythical semi-divine kings ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. This is actually in the Egyptian called the Enneads, or the 9. And then the Egyptians have the Ogdog, which is the 8, and that would be Noah, his wife, 3 kids with their wives, which would be the 8 that survived the flood. They were also considered deities. And if you look in our Bible, Noah lives 950 years, lives 500 years after the flood. And Shem, Ham, and Japheth all live about 500 years after the flood. So they are divine, they're mortal beings. And then they live like 100 years before the flood, the Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So they lived at least, I don't even think it tells us how long each of them lived, but I think we know that Shem lived about 600 years or 500 years after the flood. So they lived quite long, and they were like divine beings. But according to the Sumerian king list, a total of 8 or 9 semi-divine kings ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. Okay, now, hold on. This is not the divine beings or the cosmic powers. We're talking about the king list. And all total, they rule 241,000 years. The list begins with the establishment of the kingship in the city of Eridu, where the first ruler, Elohim, is said to have reigned for 28,800 years. Now think about this. Elohim is where we get the word Elohim. Yes, it is. And if that's plural, then that's everybody. And this is not a story about some guy named Elohim necessarily, or any of these. As we've said, these are cosmic powers, or they're something. They're describing something. In this case, Elohim may be all of us. Okay, this is where we came from, the Elohim. Now, Allah comes from this word, Eloah in our Bibles, El and Elohim, or even Eli, which is the El with an I, or my El. But El is, as I've said, Adam. And Abel is the word my father is El. So Abel's the firstborn of all creation, and I've said that's Jesus. So El is the father, but not the first cosmic power. So who was before Adam? Well, I've said Ra and a lot of these individuals, but what really was before Adam? We talked about these Yugas and ages yesterday. Well, many ages, because we have Genesis chapter 1, which says, first thing, there was just nothing, and then there was, let there be light. Oh, that's probably Pa. And then, let the light be separated from the darkness. You know, we're literally describing these cosmic powers that came into being, that ruled after the darkness ruled the light. And then we have the air separated, right, from the heavens, from the sky. There's air that's an expanse that's separated from the sky. And then we have earth and we have water. And you see, they were 6 successive days. There must have been long periods of time. Well, according to science, it was millions and millions of years. And we've seen that from the ancient scriptures, ancient Vedas, that we're told that there were thousands and thousands and thousands and maybe millions and billions of years in these yugas or ages. And so why then would the Hindus say that there were billions and one figure of 300 trillion years, the whole plan, the whole ages, and then inside that smaller ages? Why would it be such large figures? And then we come down to Sumerian, it's just 28,000 years. And then we get to the Bible, and it's just 930 for Adam, and, there's not nearly as long that each of these would rule. Adam ruled actually only 230 years in the Septuagint, and then he gave birth to Seth. And then Seth rules 205 years. Well, that's still a long time. They live a long time, but it's nothing like the Sumerian or the Egyptian time frame. But if you go back to the Hindu, you've got far greater periods. This is the same problem we have with the Bible. You say, it seems to fit real well, but the ages and the times are all messed up. And the reason is this, and I will show you here in a second. By the way, after Alum, there are who ruled 64,800 years. If that is Adam, otherwise El, or perhaps before Adam, it's the Elohim or something. I mean, we're not quite sure what all of this is. But look at this. These extremely long durations, according to AI, are generally interpreted by modern scholars as mythological or symbolic. Well, why not Adam's age of 930 years being mythological or symbolic? Right? And if so, what is the basis for this symbology? What is it symbolizing? Well, rather than literal historical accounts, they use a sexagesimal base 60 numerical system and may be symbolic representations of long periods of time, possibly reflecting lunar cycles or the immense importance and divine right associated with early kingships. After the flood, the king list records kings with much shorter, more historically plausible reign lengths, blending myth and actual historical figures and dynasties. Well, here's the thing. The Sumerians, using this sexagesimal system that they're talking of here, they had this thing where they called a year 360 days. And then they had what they called a sar. And that was where a day or a year for the Lord was 360 years. So instead of 1 year of 360 days, it was 360 years. And that certainly then multiplies these times that we have in our biblical patriarch list back to Adam. Because if it says that Adam had this many years, it could be used in the sexagesimal system. And therefore, it's not talking about human years, but divine years. So 360 divine years is 360 times 360. And how long is that? Well, look at here. In the Hindu cosmology, the term divine year or celestial year, Deva year, there's where we get Deva or David or divine or deity. This is, you see, we've got these words that we translate deity, like El, Sol, Ra, Aten. But this word divine, I believe it must have something to do with the Hindu concept of a divine or Deva, which is a divine year or a Deva year. So their unit of time is equal to 360 human solar years. The figure of 360,000 years is a specific duration within this system, not the definition of a single divine year itself. Specifically, 360,000 human years is the duration of the main period of the Kali Yuga, the current and final of 4 world ages in the Yuga cycles. So one divine year is 360 human years. A Yuga cycle, Meha Yuga, is 12,000 divine years, 4,320,000 human years. So if you look at these ages, the actual human years there of a Satya, Krita, is 1,728,000 years, but in actual divine years is 4,800. You see how these numbers will change depending on what system you're writing. And I believe this corresponds with this list before the flood. So the 360,000 years you mentioned in the Yuga proper, or the main period of the Kali Yuga, which also has a 36,000 year dawn, a sandhya, and a 36,000 year dusk, totaling 432,000 human years, or 1,200 divine years. Now think about this, 1,200, there's what, you've got 12 houses, 12 hours. This is the sexagesimal system. Everything has to divide in 12, 360 degrees. So the years in our system are 360 years, but a divine year is far greater. And it all has to do with this 360. Now, the same thing's going on with the Sumerian. Remember how Sitchin talked about Asar, which was 3,600 years. Okay, not 360, not 360 divine years necessarily, but 3,600, because everything seems to be broken up into these 3,600 or 360 or 360,000 or whatever it is. It's all broken up into this system because it's using the wheel. And every revolution is 360, regardless of whether it's times 10 or 100 or 1,000. But these are revolutions, and within revolutions, you have revolutions within revolutions. So we have today a clock, which measures 12 hours in the day. And then we have a calendar, which measures 12 months in a year. And then we have 12 astrological days or years. And this is why it's a little weird when you're looking at the Old Testament and you get a word in it. Well, this always is translated year, but sometimes it means a period, some period, another period. And we don't know what that period is. Well, because it doesn't mean a year, it means 360. And so generally that means a year when you're reading. But if it's a divine year, it could be far more. It says 1,000 years. Now let's say that really is 1,000 divine years. Then it would be 360,000 years. And then it would read, for 360,000 years in your sight is like the day. Okay, but not the night. We're not talking about the night, just the day. Okay, some kind of a day. But that's not all there is, because before, when it is past, and like a watch in the night, you carry them away like a flood. Like sleep, they are in the morning. They are like the grass which grows up. In the morning, it flourishes and grows up in the evening. It's cut down and it withers. So he's talking about a day, which is a day or a divine day, like a day unto the Lord. So it's 360,000 years. But then he mentions that it's in the middle of a watch in the night, which is the evening, and a morning. So now go back and look at that. You see, there are 360,000 years, and that's the Yuga proper, or the day, the main period of the Kali Yuga, which also has a 36,000 year dawn. What? A sandhya, and a 36,000 year dusk, which makes total 432,000 human years. And there you go. I was trying to understand how our Bible would say a day in the Lord's like 1,000 years, and that would be contradicting the original scriptures, Vedas, ancient, certain scriptures that say that a day unto the Lord's like 432,000 years. A day of Brahma. How could they be disagreeing? Certainly David, when he wrote that in the area around Karnak and Luxor down in Egypt, was the person who actually sent that information to India. The truth came from Egypt and went to India. So what they wrote in their scriptures had to agree with what David wrote. So they got it from David. David didn't get it from them. And then Peter got it from David. And Peter says, a day in the Lord like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So and he's referring to this in here in Psalms. And so Peter's referring to what David's speaking of, and David's speaking of a divine day, right? A day unto the Lord. He tells you right there. It's not our kind of day. It's a different kind of day. And a day unto the Lord is 1,000 of our days, which means 360,000 years. Because we have 360 days in a year, right? But our human year unto the Lord is like 360,000 years. So this is really what it's saying. And think about it. We're in that period of time that in our country, we got the dawn's early light. So we're in the dawn. And if the whole day is 432,000 years, then the dawn is 36,000 years. And we have just begun. And this is probably what it means that Christ shall reign for, the ages. We have still got to finish out this Kali Yuga. Now, the traditional view is, and I don't know, if you could trust anybody's view on anything, because I've never seen any of the interpreters of Scripture be right before. But the traditional view is that the 432,000 years began 3000 BC. So we are still at the very beginning of the Kali Yuga. So at first it fools you. You think, oh, well then, we got so much time left. We'll never, it ain't matching up with the Bible, because our Bible says that we're already in the dawn's early light of the day of the Lord, right? So, but wait, we got 432,000 years to go? No. The Kali Yuga is the day of the Lord that the Bible speaks of. There may be days coming after that, but right now we're entering into the actual dawn, and this dawn has been going on since the first signs of civilization, 3,000 from the days of Abraham. We've been going through this because the Septuagint chronology says that we go back maybe 3,300 years back to the flood. So 3,300 years is when this age began. After the flood, we entered into the Kali Yuga, and we're still in the dawn's early light. Now, if that's true, it changes how I see things. However, I do think we're in some other smaller age or day as well. But even in the Kali Yuga, as far as the great day of 432,000 years of the day of Brahman, we're in the day of Brahman, and that's the day of the Lord. Makes sense, doesn't it? And we're actually in the dawn's early light. So I think that this is really an eye-opening thought, to understand that we're not understanding the dates of the Bible. It's weird to me how, growing up, I was Jehovah's Witness, and they would say that the 7 times in the Bible was really 7 times 360, because Ezekiel was told, I give you a day for a year, a day for a year. So each day is 360 years, right? And so 7 years, or 7 times, isn't 7 literal years, they claim. And Adventists believe this too, and many other Christians. But it's actually a period of 2,520 years. And they just want you to accept that, in that case, that year doesn't mean a real year, but some kind of a divine year. But where'd they get this idea? Well, it's actually something that is in the ancient scriptures. But it's funny how Christians are following this same principle, because they found somewhere in Ezekiel where it tells you about this, but they never apply it to anything else, like how long Adam lived, or how long 1,000 years is. It's actually not 1,000 human years, it's 1,000 years of deity, which is right what it says in the passage in 2 Peter. Isn't that something? So that blows my mind. I don't know about yours, but I've tried for a long time to understand this, and I think I've got my answer. So Adam is in the Egyptian Atum, And he didn't just live 930 years. Adam means man. And this is probably talking about a state of humanity when we were Adim. Before we were separated into male and female, we existed at Adim. And we were immortal beings. And this is that Elohim that we just talked about that came from other things. Now, if the word Adam is plural, and they admit that, and we think of Adam as some guy, but it's actually translated many times as mankind. It's a plural word. It isn't just Adam and Eve before they were separated, but it's symbolic of the male and the female, of course. But the fact that it's translated as just all men, plural, means that words with that M on the end can mean a composite group and not be speaking of one actual thing. It may have had a leader or a king of the Elohim. I think the El was the leader of the Elohim and Adam was El. But the word Adim is just a generic term for mankind. Later on, it was given as a name to the male, evidently, or at least they used it that way. Now, if you look it up, they're going to say that Alulim is not plural. That's not how you say a plural word by putting an M on the end in the Sumerians. They say, oh, it's totally different than Hebrew. Well, it ain't that different because Sitchin was able to read some of it, and he was Hebrew. And he said because of his Hebrew knowledge, he was able to read Sumerian. So they are similar, and while they may believe that it's not plural, they don't believe that Elohim's plural either. But I think that they say it has to be singular because it's used in the sense of a singular thing. Well, a body of things or a conglomeration of things, a group can be a singular, one singular group. And I think that these names and their thousands of years of reigning are not individual people, but they're groups or civilizations or periods of time, maybe kind of like Madame Blavatsky's term race. She talked about 7 root races and so forth, and they would go over periods of ages of time. And right now we're in the Aryan race, which is not anything to do with white people or black people, but it's just all men. We're the Aryan race because we're coming up over the horizon. We're the Orion that's coming up on the spring equinox, the procession of the equinoxes. And in spring, for the last so long period of time, you see Orion coming up. So Orion is Aries. That started coming up when Christ died on that cross. And now we're just about to go into Taurus, right? So the day has come, the night is far spent. We're children of the day, not of the night. But this word, I believe, is a composite group of individuals treated as a singular, but really is Elohim, or the plural. And if that's true, then each and every one of these things that they talk about, like Adam or Enosh or Mahalalel, these were groups. And the ages before the flood are not 1,656 years, as we believe. But from Noah back to Adam was probably millions of years. And from Noah to Abraham, I think, was a long time. I don't think it was just, well, the Septuagint gives it about 1,000 years from the flood to Abraham. And the Masoretic scribes that King James and everything that we use, they say it was only about 350 years to Abraham. So there's a large 700-year difference. And if you go through the book of Jasher and you follow, the synchronicity of Jasher with the Septuagint, what you find is that there has to be a lot more time between Moses or Abraham or somebody back to the flood than what our Bible gives us. Because when Plato's talking to Solon, Solon tells Plato that from their day, which is about 600 BC, from the days of Solon, back to the sinking of Atlantis was 9,000 years. So that'd be about 9,600 BC is when that happened. Let's just say, round it off, say 10,000 years BC. We've gone another 2,000 years. That makes about 12,000 years. And that's exactly what we're saying. It would be about half of the 24,000 years that we're going to go now through the top of the wheel, right? We went through the darkness at the bottom for 12,000 years. Now we're going on the top. And this would be the dawning of the day. So if that's true, if the flood happened 10,000 BC, it didn't happen 3,300 BC. And since we know that countries like Greece and Libya and, Europe and all these, countries like Iraq and Persia, we can't find too much evidence of them before about 3,500 BC. Some have found evidence of them before that. But as a country named Libya or Egypt or Greece, they don't seem to exist before about 3,000 BC. So how could that be? We've got the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. And it gives the children of Noah as Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then, for instance, Ham gives birth to Cush, and Cush gives birth to Nimrod. And it says that in the book of Jasher, it says that Esau killed Nimrod. Well, if you add up all the chronology, it couldn't be earlier than the flood had to have happened about 3,300 years. And it couldn't have been any time before that if the ages of these patriarchs is what we got, literally. Because you would have to stick with the narrative, and we don't have any signs of Libya or Egypt or Greece before 3,300 BCE. So what you've got to understand then is that Noah and his 500 years after the flood, and Shem's 500 years, and Ham's 500 years after the flood was probably several thousand years, not just 500 years. And then when they gave birth, it wasn't literally that they were only 100 years old when they gave birth to their kid. They don't know what the age was of Ham when he gave birth to Cush, but instead of being about 100 years, what they kind of think, it may have been several thousand years, you see, because we're not talking about a man named Ham, but a group or a certain stage of our development in human history. See, there is history even beyond the idea of us as Elohim. Not only is there history beyond Adam, there is history beyond the divine state of being when we were all Elohim in the very, very beginning. And before the beginning, there were other individuals before Elohim. And these are the cosmic powers that created the world in 6 days in Genesis chapter 1. So our Bible doesn't give a length of time where there was light and another length where there was land forming or sky. But it was divine years, multiple divine years, great ages that is actually expanded upon in some of these other texts. So our Bible just goes back in a very simple way. Deity created the heavens and the earth, doesn't give you the time, but it does give you 6 graduating stages. Whereas the Sumerian gives you long list of these cosmic powers in an anthropomorphic way and gives them names appropriately as cosmic powers and gives them ages of thousands and thousands of years. And then we go back even further with the Hindu, and we go back millions and billions of years, even trillions, because it's going further. It's not just starting from Adam or even Noah, but it's starting from other things that happened before man lived on earth. So Adam, Atum, otherwise known as El, and all of us are his children, the Elohim, we were put on the earth. And from that point forward, we became physical earthly beings. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm hearing that this person that I was speaking of earlier mentioned me on Archaic's channel and said that I would be willing to debate him. So, and I have no idea even what Archaic really believes, but I was told he does believe in deity, but I actually went over today and looked at one of his videos. I just watched part of one of his videos. And it doesn't look like he believes in any kind of deity. He doesn't believe in the Bible, certainly doesn't believe in Jesus. And he doesn't believe in, I think he's doing what he's accusing Graham Hancock of doing. So he's saying that it's all publicity, they're doing it for greed and money, and they know that Atlantis isn't real, and they're fudging the evidence, the history, to make it look like biblical things and great, amazing scriptural, spiritual truths and esoteric wisdom is really something. But in reality, all this biblical stuff is poppycock. There was no flood. There's no Noah. There was no Jesus. The Bible is just a story. And you can't prove that there ever was a Noah, or that there was a Moses, or that there was an Adam, or that there was anybody. Yes, there's a lot of esoteric wisdom in the Bible, but that it's just not true. It's a made-up fantasy. There's no truth to this esoteric teachings that you find in the Bible. These temples were made by men. There's no divine direction. We're not in a divine classroom. He's basically an atheist. People say, oh, don't accuse him of that. He believes in the oversoul. What over? He makes up some word, oversoul. But you, Dave, you talk about deity instead of God. No, I use the term that is in the Bible, the definition. I believe what the Bible teaches, the ancient wisdom. I believe in a divine mind, a divine being that's in all, through all, and above all, and his purpose that he's planned for us, and his holy scriptures. And anybody who doesn't believe in that, and therefore Jesus doesn't believe in the holy scriptures, the divine plan, and they might talk about some oversoul, but who knows what that means? They don't have any faith in the teachings of Christ or the Vedas or the Avestas or any divine knowledge or truth in the temples. And that is atheism. So I'm sorry, I'm going to continue to say that Archaic is an atheist. He is an atheist. He doesn't believe in Jesus and his second coming. I don't think he believed he came the first time. Although I don't know the exact details of what he really believes. But if he doesn't believe in the Bible, then obviously he doesn't believe in Jesus. If he doesn't believe in Noah or Moses or the prophets or Peter, James, and John and their authority, then he doesn't believe in Jesus. And he doesn't believe what they teach, which is the divine being, our divine Heavenly Father and our divine Mother. You see, in modern ecclesiastical times, where people are going to college and learning all this highfalutin garbage, lies, they deviate from the word, from the truth. They teach utility. They teach what they might call deism. Oh, I'm a deist. Well, what does that mean? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? No, it doesn't mean that. And why would you have to believe that? Maybe you're Buddhist or something. Because Vedas are the scripture of the Buddhas. And they teach the exact same teachings as the Bible. I know that people may not know that, but that's not the point. The point is they don't know that, so they don't believe. And they don't believe in any scriptures. They don't believe in divine authority. Therefore, they don't believe that because if they believed in a divine being, they'd believe in a divine outcome. They believe in the coming kingdom. But they all, one and all, deny the actual coming kingdom of Christ and his authority and his name. And therefore, they do not call upon his name. And so whatever it is that they believe in, they want to call it an oversoul or whatever. Where's the plan? What is the plan? Who's watching out for us? What's the destiny of mankind? Why are we here? Without Jesus as the fulfillment of all Scripture, whether it's Hindu, Egyptian, Assyrian, Mesoamerican, Chinese, or whatever, all Scripture is inspired, beneficial for teaching and reproving and setting matters straight. And all of it testifies of Jesus Christ. But even if you didn't know Jesus, but you just believed in your version of the divine being, and you said, well, I believe in an oversoul, I believe in a divine spirit, it, probably is why the world is here. It's a manifesting universe. But it isn't love. It isn't someone with intent, personality. It isn't love. It isn't the true divine being, which is love. We're his children. If you don't believe that there is a divine father and we're his children, then you don't really believe in a divine being, because a divine being is a being, not an inanimate force or good luck or whatever it is that you're believing. So look, I don't know fully exactly what Archaic believes, but maybe I'll find out soon, because I'm told that they're thinking about taking me on and debating me. And Archaic, if you do hear this or watch this, I'm up for it. Hit me up. Let's come up with a time, and I'll go on your show, and you can interview me, or we can just discuss this or debate it or do whatever you want to do. But I'd really like to talk to you, and I really appreciate you for thinking about doing this, and I hope you decide to go ahead and debate me. And it will be a cordial thing if we do, and I'll be respectful, and we can set up the rules of the debate or whatever you want to do. And, I certainly respect you as a human being, as a person. We just probably disagree on a lot of things. And if you'd like to debate those things, I'm up for it. So, anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you guys have a wonderful evening. The Lord will bless you. He loves everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.